welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. Today, we are going to discuss the judgment authored by Justice M.R. Shah, which is called popularly as the Loan Moratorium Judgment. It gave a lot of concessions to the industry in terms of interest rates, and this case was filed by the Small Scale Industrial Manufacturers Association. Today, we are also going to discuss on the show how the small scale industry in India can be helped or handheld, as they say. Because the past 2 years, if I may, even put it rightly, have been really tough for the small manufacturers. And if government comes and holds their hand, it will help India gain a lot of jobs, also a lot of growth. And to discuss this, I have with me Alok Sriram. He is the past president of the PhD Chamber of Commerce, and a very vocal one at that when he was the president. His other responsibilities include being the senior managing director of DCM Sriram Industries. Today, he is going to speak as a representative of small and medium enterprises on this show. I have with me Gagan Kumar on the show, who is a chartered accountant turned lawyer. He started his law firm called Krishnomics Legal. He is going to decode the judgment for us. He normally speaks a lot on tax matters. So we will start with the opening comment from Mr. Gagan Kumar. Could you decode yesterday's judgment in about 2 minutes for us before we open the discussion?
Thanks, Tarun. Yes, the judgment, I would say it's a very crucial judgment from multiple aspects. The most important aspect, I would say, that it gives an insight into the mindset of the government, and for any business to flourish in a political environment, it is very necessary to understand the mindset of the government in office of the day. Just to give you a perspective onto the judgment, there were 4 major issues which were raised during this during the argument before the court. One was that the moratorium circular issued by the RBI was arbitrary in nature, as it only covered loans up to 2 crores. The second prayer was that a sector-specific relief ought to have been given, which was not given. And the third prayer was that there ought to be waiver of the interest for the period of the COVID crisis. And lastly, the challenge was that the NDMA did not act in time, that is the National Disaster Management Authority. Now, court went through all those arguments, and many issues were raised by both the parties. Just to summarize, the court ultimately held that it is not arbitrary because the waiver of interest is not possible, considering that the interest payment for the period of 6 months, that is the period of moratorium itself, would be close to 6 lakh crore. And it is next to impossible for any economy to waive it completely. The other reason for not allowing waiver was that the banks or the financial institution were under obligation to pay interest to depositors, and there was no moratorium on that. So for that reason also, it was not possible to waive the interest as such. In any case, the court explained that the word moratorium means deferment of payment and not the waiver of interest per se. So moratorium is sufficient. Then on the issue that the sector-specific relief were not given, the court observed that each sector had their own unique set of challenges. Like, for example, FMCG did not take that much of a hit as compared to a hospitality sector or a tourism sector. They were completely stunned. So the courts noted that the government came up with the Garib Kalyan Yojana, which was about 1.7 lakh crore, free food, cash payment, etc. Then government also came up with the Atmanirbhar Bharat Yojana, which was 20 lakh crore, and it included 2% interest subvention and 1.87 lakh crore of credit guarantee by government also. Then Finance Ministry also pitched in by reducing the TDS rates as well as deferring the payment for GST. So on that count, court said that it is not possible to opt for sector-specific relief. Government did its bit in addressing various concerns of MSME and real estate sector and banking sector per se. Then on the legal issue that whether NDMA ought to have acted in a better manner than it acted, the issue was debated upon Section 13 of the Disaster Management Act. Now, for the audience, Section 13 of Disaster Management Act actually provides that in case of a crisis, the national authority may recommend relief in repayment of loan or grant of fresh loan. So the court said that the word used is may, and the role of NDMA was only to recommend. And it did recommend to RBI, and pursuant to that recommendation, the RBI came up with a subsequent circular as well. In any case, NDMA is not supposed to act as a super government. It does not overtake the government departments as such in case of a national crisis. It would act through the respective ministries, and considering the magnitude of the crisis, one ministry was not capable enough to deal with the challenge, and therefore multiple ministries pitched in their own manner: Railway Ministry, Agriculture Ministry, Finance Ministry, and Commerce Ministry. So to that extent, it was held that NDMA acted as per the regulation, and just because that the government efforts were not liked by some segment would not make it arbitrary. Having said that, court concluded that the issue of moratorium is only a relief, and therefore charging interest on the interest for the moratorium period is penal interest in nature.
Yes.
And to that extent, that is arbitrary, and that is something which was struck down by the court.
Okay. So charging interest on already the waiver is. So we will go to Mr. Sriram. How would you take the judgment for the industry A, and is this enough?
I think my answer will really be in two parts. The first part is that the Supreme Court, I think, has to be commended very highly on the fact that they have not gone into legal overreach. In many segments, they're lately been blamed for legal overreach. Here, they have very clearly differentiated policy and the relief and the nature of the compound or penal interest. So they have very clearly said that the decisions that are taken are based on policy, and that is the comes within the ambit of the Ministry of Finance, RBI, and other government arms. And I think that is extremely commendable. On the other side, they have made the point, as Mr. Kumar said, that when you have given a relief and a deferment of interest, the penal interest or penalties and the compounding should not take place. And I think that is a very rational method of looking at it. But let's say I can't call them objections, but my dismay is that the government should have given much more in terms of relief.
Okay.
You see, it's important that the pain is spread across everyone's lap. We all know that trade globally shut down for last 1 year. And to say that we are giving you a little deferment is not enough. When you're deferring all these things, they have not given up anything. Globally, we are seeing Europe is shutting down, England is shutting down. So this is very worrying. I think the government must understand that the MSME segment is very vulnerable because they are always very lean operations. They make fairly small profits. And if they lose business, they must get some relief somewhere. That's why I think they had taken this issue of people with 2 crores and less. So when there is a interest payout of 6 lakh crores, the interest payout to these small segments with small loans is actually maybe just a few thousand crores. And I think our banking system has enough depth to be able to take that sort of hit. A few thousand crores doesn't really make such a difference to them when it's spread over a large number of banks. So we were hoping that we would actually get relief on the interest itself, not just waiver of the penal interest and compound interest.
Okay, so basically relief on interest is what was expected. I have with me Mr. Gopal Agarwal joining us. He's National Spokesperson, Economic Affairs of the Bharatiya Janata Party, in addition to having responsibilities as the Director of Bank of Baroda and the Northeastern Electric Power Corporation. Sir, at the outset, we had Mr. Gagan Kumar explaining the judgment to us. We had Alok Shriram, the Senior MD, DCM Shriram Limited, saying that interest waiver would have been a better, in a sense, hand-holding support to the MSME. Your comments on the same, as well as on the judgment that came yesterday.
I heard some of the points with Alok Shriramji raised, and I read the details about the judgment also in the newspapers. And I have been, as you said, I have been on the board of Bank of Baroda, and I am also on the IIP Institute of Company Secretaries Company on Insolvency Professionals Regulations, and many closely associated with this development. What I feel was the concern about the banking industries also, which has been put to rest by the current judgment, is that about the problems of credit behavior. That is also very important. It is not only the amount itself, who will foot the bill, etc. One thing is the credit behavior and the financial decision, who will take the call. Because ultimately, at one point of time, everybody is talking about removing the constraint and require this commercial decisions by the bank themselves, banks taking commercial decisions, etc. Otherwise, if you think bank as an instrument of government policy alone, I don't deny that banks have an important role in the implementation of various government policies and schemes, but they are in itself a commercial entity. And ultimately, if you do not take this commercial decisions based on commercial considerations alone, then it becomes very difficult. You cannot force banks to not charge interest or anything. If the government has to do, it has to shell out from its own budgetary resources. And on that, government at the government level, we have been talking and discussing also. The thing is, the government has a resource constraint. That is one thing. It allocates resources into various areas. And after pandemic, one of the successful roadmap that the government has built, because of which we are seeing the fast track recovery on the economy, is because government is allocating resources to wherever, which sector or which segment or at which point of time is best suited and required, and which gives a multiplier effect. So giving moratorium was fine. But now I don't deny that the industry should not demand this, or industry does not have the right, or they do, their concerns are not genuine. But ultimately, how much stimulus can be given to any particular segment?
Mr. Agarwal, if I may interrupt at this stage, I have always recognized, and we have always recognized you somebody who understands the pain of the industry. You have in the past been vocal about the help that the small and medium enterprises need. Given all those considerations, and say in the past about 18 months or so, we have seen that especially the MSME sector has seen a lot of pain in terms of business also, and in terms of credit support also. Do you think that an interest waiver could have been on the table? I mean, would it have been possible, or was simply out of question that such a consideration could even have been considered by higher ups in the government?
No, it was well considered and well discussed. And after that consideration only, this was the general perception and thought in the government or in the banking sector or the financial sector, that interest waiver that can be demanded. I don't say that any segment has a right to demand stimulus from the government, but ultimately this is not at that point of time. Interest waiver is not right. That is the general thinking, because one thing, it affects the credit behavior to the large extent, and secondly, it gives a constraint on the resources of the government, additional constraint on the resources of the government. If the government has to pay, the government cannot force the banks to put the bill. And secondly, the strength of bank is also very important for catalyzing the economic growth.
Okay.
If this kind of waivers, etc., happen, then ultimately the capital adequacy and the stability and the strength of the bank itself is weakened. Already we have
This
seen.
point by you leads me to Mr. Gagan Kumar, and if I may, Mr. Gagan Kumar, ask you a question. Their talk of capital adequacy of the banks is there. NCLT is about to open the moratorium in that sense. These cases are going to be filed from April, if I'm not wrong. Do you think that the worst is yet to come for the banks in those terms? Because 2020 has been tough for a lot of companies.
You're right, Tarun. See, in my view, the second wave, the wave we are witnessing currently, is also going to put further burden. And I think it would be too early to say that the economy has recovered.
Yes.
But to add to what Gopalji said, and see, as I said in the beginning, that it is very important for any businessman to understand the mindset of the government of the day. And my reading, and Gopalji may correct me on that, is that what I call is that it is a capitalist socialism. When I say capitalist socialism, it would essentially mean that while the government is there to act as a facilitator, it would encourage businesses. It would not become their crutches. At the same time, it would intend to ameliorate the suffering of the people who cannot fend for themselves. So, as we say in the Latin maxim, is that the parens patriae, that is, the state has to be the protector of those who cannot protect themselves. So, to my mind, the government is acting in that philosophy. So, while it is encouraging businesses to sustain themselves, at the same time step in as and when they're going down, or as and when any section of the society is suffering. So I am of the view that considering this second wave, government may reconsider extending the moratorium under IBC.
I have to ask three questions of you. A, as Mr. Gagan Kumar said, extending the moratorium on IBC. B, could you give us about 2-3 steps that the government may, in a sense, consider taking to handhold the MSME sector? And third, what do you make of the economic climate in 21-22, given that we are still not out of the shocks of Corona as yet? Do you think the worst is yet to come for the small industries in this year?
Let me start answering that from the third question, the economic climate. I think the economic climate is extremely weak.
Yes.
Fortunately, the GST figures within India show that a lot of spring back has taken place. But I think in terms of global trade and global business, we are in a very difficult space. I mean, recently you've heard about the logistics issues. Now, 2 days back, one ship has put the world trade on hold, as you know. There's one ship in Suez Canal, which has... So the global trade is also extremely fragile, as is the global demand. You see, whenever such COVID-like situations happen, demand shuts down. The entertainment industry, the service industries, the textile industry, garment industry, all is in the doldrums. And a lot of these are industries which are the bread and butter industries for India. And these are the industries the small scale MSME is totally dependent on. So I think at least the current year, 21-22, will continue to be a very demanding year, a very tough year. And a lot of more handholding needs to continue. Therefore, I think the government must continue with its support in whichever form. I believe there should be more types of supports, because while on one side, I think the finance ministry and the RBI have given a lot of support on the removal of penal interest and moratoriums. There are many other areas where the costs are going up totally disproportionate and arbitrarily, whether it is power cost or wage costs or very statutory issues. I think the government should start looking at these also, and not just keep increasing costs for an industry, especially the MSME, which is already in the doldrums. It is a very fragile and brittle section of our industry, and any knocks on an already beaten up industry is going to have pretty severe consequences. And I think the biggest problem we will have obviously is job creation and even holding the jobs that are already there. And the government must recognize this.
Okay. So a few bit of important points from Mr. Sriram. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, I have two questions to ask of you. First would be, we recently did a show on the GST, where the Small Traders Association and the business associations had a lot of questions. And they were demanding clarity on will GST be eased out as a whole. So there is a lot of reservations on GST as far as the small businesses are concerned. Second, if you could answer to what issues Mr. Alok Sriram raised.
Tarunji, I have this about GST is a right concern about MSE sectors, because what I see over the years is that the conceptually GST is quite different, and the implementation level under which whether it is the administrative setup of the government or bureaucratic interference, etc.,
yes,
has complicated many of the issues. So what I find, I'm also a chartered accountant also, and I interact with industries, businesses a lot, and I look after the economic affairs from the party. What I see is over a period, some gaps have developed into the ground level implementation of GST, like physical verification of document at the time of registration. Many things I have talked to many professionals extensively, and I have been talking to the finance minister also. We need to tweak GST and make it towards clear-cut roadmap towards what is the conceptual, that complete removal of human intervention in the operations and implementation of GST. But this is not only government role, because I also find from the industries, I have associated with PhD with Mr. Alok Sriram also. I was part of the managing committee also earlier, and FICCI, SOCHM also. What the industries, MSME, as a Laghu Udyog Bharti, etc., I also interact. What happens is they themselves want certain issues like extend the time for filing of returns. And then they say that give us input tax credit immediately. If you are asking for extension of time limit in filing and return, then how the government can give input tax credit without reconciliation? The biggest problem under GST is input tax credit, and same problem is with the industries also, that their working capital is stuck in the input tax credit. So this change of focus from the industries is also required, that you also decide on a roadmap that you want complete objectivity into the implementation. Then why you have asked for removal of the reverse charge mechanism? It's a good concept. So that is one part that I think that industries cannot have, जो कहते हैं ना लड्डू हाथ में भी रखेंगे और ले भी लेंगे, वो वाली बात एक तो छोड़ दें. दूसरी मुझे आलोक जी ये एक बात कहनी है. I have been talking, we are working on several new policies in the government, industrial policy, logistic policy, which are very old in the country, and they need revamp and new industrial policies from 1948 industrial policy we are working now in 2021. So it needs change. Then logistic policy, there is no retail trade policy, e-commerce policy requires a lot of change, import export policy. Government is working on that. But the industry focus should be not from protectionist only. If you see domestic industries where MSME has an important role to play in the manufacturing sector, it generates employment also, but it has to slowly go towards becoming competitive in the global arena, and India cannot continue to be disaligned with the global and regional supply chains. At present, we have worked towards RCEP and removing FTA, reworking on the FTA, because that has hurt the growth of MSME. But the bigger problem is that our industries have not become competitive in the global and regional supply chain and not integrated. And government has also a important reason for it, but industries have also not demanding that why logistic cost is higher by 40% to India, how can we become competitive? Or power sector, why the cost of power is so high, why the land cost and land banks are so high. So the focus from industry should shift from asking for dole-ups or fiscal stimulus or protectionist, should slowly focus towards reducing the cost of production, etc. And that way, our industries, MSME will progress. We are working on both ends.
But as far as
Reducing the competitive.
as far as the FTA is concerned, in a recent interview that I took with Mr. Satish Pai, MD of Hindalco, even the aluminium sector has been impacted by FTAs too badly. The imports have now crossed 50% of the total requirement. So in that sense, our installed capacity of about 40% is lying idle. But that's for another day.
नहीं, but Tarun ji, एक बात और मैं कहना चाहता हूँ. The important thing is government has increased the import duties over the period in the budget successively.
Yes.
Reworking on the FTA and not signed RCEP.
Yes.
What is the impact? Now industry, MSME are taking that the raw material cost has increased, skyrocketed.
Yes.
They are saying, so it becomes a very difficult situation. If you go for protectionist only, you have to balance things. Yes. Raw material cost is a big concern for every MSME industry. Steel, cement, aluminium, copper.
Yes.
This is also skyrocketing. So
I agree.
We have economic decision policy making has to be very balanced. Therefore, I do not agree with Alok Shriramji. Our economy is in good shape. We are moving in the right direction. We are and it is not only our government is saying, international institutions like World Bank, IMF are also agreeing that Indian economy is moving in I don't deny that there are problems, but still our direction on economic reforms, etc., are very right. But our narration on economy in the country is very poor. We lost on to the agriculture land reforms earlier in 2015. We wanted to bring big land reforms. Government had to backtrack because of narration and politics. Now we see same thing happening in the agriculture sector. Same thing will happen in the labor sector.
I concede your point. Very quickly, last comment from Mr. Gagan Kumar. In about a minute, can you please say your reservations on GST? You were vocal when I remember I invited you with the if I'm not wrong, the Association of Small Traders. This was about 2 weeks ago.
So as Alok ji expressed, and I echo his sentiment, that there are few relaxations are desired from the tax regime, be it the TDS regime or be it the GST regime. These are the two pain points which actually suck up the whole working capital. And God forbid, if any proceedings are initiated, then the businesses come to a standstill. So that is something where I think industry would look forward to some support from government. And just on the touching very briefly on the issue of aluminium and other things, I think the recent amendments in the mining law in the current parliament session would go a long way in addressing those issues as well.
Okay. Mr. Sriram, do you want in about 30 seconds to respond to any comment that Mr. Gopal Agarwal made?
Yes, certainly. I think Gopalji misunderstood what I said. I said in the last 6 months, the GST levels of collection show that the industry and the economy is doing fairly well. But since we are talking about the problems of COVID and the fact that there is a second wave, I think MSME sector, which has not craved protectionism and wants to become competitive, at this time needs a lot of hand holding and a lot of support to go through the next 1 year also. Because I think it is going to go into the same spiral in spite of its desire to make good its debts and pay back to the bank.
Okay. Point noted. I thank Mr. Alok Shriram, Mr. Gopal Agarwal, and Mr. Gagan Kumar for joining us in this episode of Policy and Politics. Of course, there are many more issues related to the small industry that we're going to take up in the coming weeks. But that's it for this episode. Thank you so much. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.